Good morning. It's time to face the facts. We have a housing crisis in Canada. The supply of homes to own as well as to rent is not keeping up with our growing population. Foreign investors are also making the situation worse. They are bidding up prices, and in some cases they're sitting on their investments and actually leaving homes empty while Canadians continue to search for affordable homes. L'offre de logement pour acheter ou pour louer ne suit pas la croissance de la population canadienne. Les investisseurs étrangers aggravent aussi la situation. Dans certains cas, ils s'assoient sur les investissements et laissent les maisons vides. Pendant ce temps, les Canadiens continuent de chercher des logements abordables. Even worse, we are learning through an inquiry in British Columbia that criminals are using Canada's housing market to stash the proceeds of crime. All of this throws up barriers to young families looking for more space for their kids, people who have found a good job and want to buy their first home, and retired empty nesters trying to downsize, none of whom can find the home they need. Canada's recovery plan will build more homes for Canadians and stop foreign money from pushing prices out of reach. First, we will implement our plan to kickstart the building of 1 million homes in the next 3 years. The Government of Canada is the largest landowner in the country. Much of the land the government owns could be developed for housing. We will release at least 15% of the buildings that belong to the federal government to build more homes. Tout d'abord, on va mettre en œuvre notre plan pour construire 1 million de logements au cours des 3 prochaines années. Le gouvernement du Canada est le plus grand propriétaire foncier du pays. Une grande partie des propriétés qu'il possède le gouvernement pourrait se transformer en logements. Pour construire plus de logements, on va libérer au moins 15% des immeubles qui appartiennent au gouvernement fédéral. The Government of Canada also spends billions of dollars every year building transit. It's time to focus on transit-oriented development, ensuring that we build homes and increase density near transit. Our plan will provide more Canadians with a path to home ownership by making it easier for more families to get a mortgage. To do so, we will develop a new market in 7 to 10-year mortgage terms to provide stability, both for first-time homebuyers and lenders. And we'll make improvements to the mortgage stress test and mortgage insurance rules to help Canadians afford homes. To stop foreign investors from sitting on empty homes and to get the proceeds of crime out of our housing market, we will ban foreign investors from purchasing homes here if they don't intend to live in or move to Canada. If people around the world want to invest in our great country, and I want that, we will instead encourage them to invest in purpose-built rental housing to provide more affordable options to Canadians. We'll provide incentives to get more rental housing built, and we will create a federal beneficial ownership registry for residential property and strengthen our laws to root out money laundering. Finally, Canada's Conservatives will never tax the capital gains on the sale of your principal home, something we know that the Liberals have been laying the groundwork to do. Pour empêcher les investisseurs étrangers de monopoliser les logements vides ou encore pour retirer les produits de la criminalité du marché immobilier, on va interdire aux investisseurs étrangers d'acheter des maisons au Canada, surtout s'ils n'ont pas l'intention de vivre au pays ou de s'y installer. Si des personnes veulent investir au Canada, on va les encourager à investir dans des logements locatifs construits à cet effet. On va pouvoir offrir des options plus abordables aux Canadiens. Aussi, on va fournir des incitatifs pour construire plus de logements locatifs. Et on va créer un registre de propriété effective fédéral pour les propriétés résidentielles, en plus de renforcer nos lois contre le blanchiment d'argent. Finalement, les conservateurs ne vont jamais imposer les gains en capital sur la vente de votre résidence principale, chose que les libéraux veulent faire. Our housing plan is comprehensive, and it will be effective. It will give all Canadians a chance to build the life they dream of, to live on a street with good neighbors, as my friends told me they do. If your family can afford to ignore the housing crisis, you have three parties to choose from. But if you want your government to secure a future where you and your family can afford a home that meets your needs, you have only one choice: Canada's Conservatives. Together, we will secure housing for Canadians. Ensemble, on va agir pour rendre les logements plus abordables. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
We will now be taking questions. Nous allons maintenant prendre des questions.
Mr. O'Toole, good morning. Travis Danner, CBC News. I know that you're going to likely get a lot of questions on your theme today, which is affordable housing, but I want to zoom out for a moment and talk a little bit about the past couple of days of your campaign. So far, your events have been fairly sanitized in controlled settings with supporters with you or with the media and a teleprompter like today. Are you going to consider what some may see as a safety bubble at some point and meet with Canadians that may challenge your stance on issues?
Well, Travis, I've spoken to more Canadians directly in this campaign than any of the party leaders through our telephone town halls, which are people bringing me their questions and concerns. We're going to be doing more. We've spoken to tens of thousands of people, as I did throughout the pandemic. We are also making sure we're following the strictest of health, sanitation, and distancing rules for an election that Mr. Trudeau called in the midst of British Columbia on fire, in the midst of a fourth wave, the deterioration and chaos in Afghanistan. We're in the Trudeau fourth wave election. We're going to have a combination of safe in-person events. I will be accountable to all Canadians, unlike Mr. Trudeau.
And you brought up the town halls. I know that you're going to have 2 virtual town halls this afternoon and early this evening. I want to ask you about that because you say that these town halls are to hear a range of questions and opinions, but we've been trying to get answers on the screening process for calls, and we haven't gotten many details on who can ask you a question and who can't. So far, no caller has been very critical of you. Can you confirm that your team is not only filtering in people that are supporters of you and filtering out those that oppose your stance on issues?
Well, this is a great opportunity to invite folks. I think we're going to be in New Brunswick and a few other places today in our telephone town halls to stay tuned. If the phone rings, we're calling people at large, and you can hear on the line, it's them speaking to me directly, asking the question that's on their mind. So the only thing is we don't want a lot of repetition. We want all issues canvassed because there's issues that all Canadians or families are facing. People can't afford the cost of living. Inflation's going up. Mr. Trudeau doesn't seem concerned about that. We want to talk about our 5 points in Canada's recovery plan. We have an exciting plan that will not leave behind a single Canadian family. We need to make sure the recovery from COVID is in all parts of the country and all sectors of the economy. And I look forward to speaking to thousands of more Canadians throughout this campaign.
Next question.
Abigail Beeman, Global News. I want to zone in on the affordable part of your affordable housing announcement. The incentives to provide rental housing are not that clear. I understand you're talking about 1 million homes, but can you talk more about specifically what you're doing for affordable housing and people who can't afford prices and the not enough volume for renters?
Well, we have a comprehensive plan that will actually fire up supply. We need to build 1 million homes in the next 3 years, and that means going from about 270,000 homes constructed per year and units up to over 340,000. To do that, we're going to release some property of the federal government, 15% of federal holdings for supply. We're going to encourage density with federal investments in transit. We need to get density up where the federal government's playing that role. We're going to give first-time home buyers more flexibility by fixing the mortgage stress test, but also giving longer terms so that people in their mortgage can get 7 or 10-year terms for certainty. And we're going to incentivize the construction of more purpose-built rental housing through a series of measures, including rollovers, to make sure there's more supply dedicated for rent. Because the one thing I'm hearing across the country is people can't keep up with the rising cost of living. Wages aren't going up. Canada's recovery plan is all about getting wages up, getting people working, tackling rising prices, and giving Canadians a break.
It's an interesting part of your plan in terms of the bringing transit infrastructure to where people live, but I don't understand how that's feasible to do within 3 years. You know, transit infrastructure promises sometimes take decades to fulfill. So can you explain how you can build new transit and increase density around it when you also have to, you know, work with other partners to get that done within 3 years?
That's a great question. And some provinces are already doing this, including in Ontario. And one of the challenges with Mr. Trudeau, he's very good at announcements and tweets and photographs, very poor at delivering. In fact, only about 60% of the infrastructure dollars he announces, according to the parliamentary budget officer, gets out the door. We need to get those homes built. We need to invest in transit. We need to get this country moving after 15 very difficult months for families. And home construction and construction writ large is one of the most important drivers of our economy. So we're going to build this country again. We're going to have jobs and opportunity in all sectors. And our ambitious target of 1 million homes in the next 3 years, we have a comprehensive plan to get there, including density in housing, including changes to the mortgage rules, including freeing up federal lands. We're going to tackle this with more than just empty words like Mr. Trudeau.
Next question.
Chris Reynolds, Canadian Press. Conservative Calgary MP Michelle Rempel-Garner has asked the federal health minister to look at the benefits or harms of poppers. This is a drug primarily used by men who have sex with men, with the possible outcome of establishing safe supply. She says the widespread use of poppers or alkyl nitrates hasn't received adequate study, partly because of the stigmatization of LGBTQ plus healthcare. So is the use of these drugs, which serve to relax muscles but have been pushed into the gray market, something your government would be open to?
Well, as you know, Michelle Rempel-Garner has been our lead on health issues throughout this pandemic. We've been holding the government to account on slow pace on approval of rapid tests, on vaccines. And I want members of the LGBTQ community to know if they want something looked at, if they're advocating for an issue, as Michelle has, as I have, as other members of our caucus have, we want to make sure that a federal government is responsive to the needs of all Canadians in all communities. It's also why we've been holding Mr. Trudeau to account for his broken promise, now over 5 years, to gay men with respect to the unfair, the discriminatory blood ban. So we will advocate, including asking for Health Canada to examine issues of concern to the LGBTQ community.
You've also inked conscience rights for doctors and nurses into your platform. Do you think it's acceptable for a doctor or for a nurse to refuse to provide a service like abortion, or even to have to refuse to refer patients to such a service?
Well, as you know, I'm pro-choice, and I want to make sure that access for women to those services are available across the country. It's an important right I will not only defend. I think we can also defend conscience rights for our incredible men and women on the front lines in our healthcare system. That is something we're going to do, particularly as we're studying expansions to assisted dying with some concerns about mental health. We can get the balance right, but let me be perfectly clear. As a pro-choice leader of this party, I will make sure that we defend the rights of women to make the choice for themselves with respect to their own health. Comme vous le savez, je suis pro-choix et je suis un chef pro-choix et je veux toujours défendre les droits pour les femmes de choisir pour elles-mêmes. Point final. C'est très important pour moi de dire ça. On va aussi examiner les droits de conscience pour nos infirmières et nos médecins, particulièrement avec l'augmentation, avec l'aide médicale à mourir. C'est possible de trouver une approche équilibrée, particulièrement avec la santé mentale. Mais je dois être très clair sur l'avortement. C'est important pour les femmes d'avoir accès de notions à l'autre.
Next question.
Ian Bailey, Globe and Mail, asking for a colleague. The government has to approve a new inflation mandate for the Bank of Canada later this year. Do you support maintaining the current flexible inflation targeting model, or would you prefer the central bank move to another monetary policy regime, such as average inflation targeting or a dual mandate that targets inflation and unemployment? Employment, sorry.
Unlike Justin Trudeau, I'm concerned about monetary policy because I'm concerned about the housing crisis, the fact that hundreds of thousands of Canadians are having trouble keeping up with their bills, the rising costs, inflation at near 20-year highs doesn't seem to concern Mr. Trudeau. It concerns us, and that's why in our plan, we actually will give Canadians a break. We will put pressure to get wages up and prices down. We want to give people a break in December with respect to the GST to also fuel purchases in bricks and mortar retail locations who are struggling. The biggest thing I hear from coast to coast is the rising cost of living. Canada's recovery plan is intended to tackle that.
Fair enough, but which of the two models do you prefer?
I prefer keeping inflation low, and the target of 2%, which is the current mandate, is one we should continue, because it can have economic growth and allow Canadians to keep pace with rising costs of living. This is a real issue facing families, and Mr. Trudeau doesn't concern himself with these issues because he doesn't understand the impact it has on single seniors who are having trouble keeping up with rising costs, families trying to give their kids what they need. Small business owners have told me their suppliers are raising all costs. Inflation, for the first time in decades, is a risk under Mr. Trudeau, and he doesn't seem concerned by it. It is what drives me, fighting for affordability for families, for seniors. Let's get wages up and get pressure on prices down.
Next question.
Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. Kevin Gallagher, CTV National News. I'd like to ask you again about your affordable housing announcement today. So specifically, I'd like to zone in on this 15% of federally owned buildings. So paint me a picture. If I'm someone looking to rent a house, are you saying that I'm going to move into an old office building that's going to be retrofitted? I'd like to see how that's going to work, how that's affordable, and how that's feasible in 3 years.
Well, great question, Kevin. There's a number of policies and programs that if we release, as we say, 15% of some of the Crown holdings, it will give supply to be built, including property, not just existing buildings. We've seen that even here in Ottawa with the release of Crown land from the old Uplands Air Force Base, where there was a number of nonprofit groups on the ground looking at tackling housing issues, affordability issues, and have a project for veterans. So all levels of government need to play a role in fighting the housing crisis. I'm showing the federal government will be a serious partner, not just in giving first-time homebuyers longer mortgage terms, not just by encouraging more rental housing, dedicated, specific, purpose-built rental housing, but also making sure we release some of the holdings of the federal government. We're playing a major role in tackling this crisis. On doit travailler avec les autres paliers du gouvernement sur la crise de logement maintenant. Et on a un plan pour ça avec plusieurs politiques spécifiques sur cette crise, incluant les terres avec le gouvernement fédéral. On doit donner 15% de nos propriétés pour logement et pour une approche nationale contre la crise. On a des autres politiques sur les hypothèques, sur les logements de loyer. On doit travailler ensemble avec les municipalités, avec les provinces, de lutter contre la crise de logement.
I'd like to follow up on one of my colleagues' earlier questions, specifically on your platform proposal to allow doctors to, have a right of conscience to refuse certain medical procedures. I'd like to hear specifically, though, would that apply to abortion? Because if it does, I mean, there might be concerns for what you're saying about giving a woman a right to choose. Doesn't that impact their access to service if that is true for doctors to have a right to choose to consciously object from abortion services? Tell me what you think.
Well, let me repeat again. I'm pro-choice, and we will make sure that women have the ability to make decisions with respect to their health care themselves and make sure that abortion services are available from one coast, from one ocean to the other. And what's interesting about this election is all federal leaders are pro-choice. I've been crystal clear throughout my political career. I will be crystal clear as Prime Minister. I'm here to defend the rights of all Canadians. I'm here to make sure they have a more prosperous future. And I'm here to make sure we tackle the challenges facing our country post-COVID and specific issues with the inflation crisis and the housing crisis. Canada's recovery plan is the solution, led by a leader who's going to bring Canadians together.
Prochaine question.
Bonjour, M. O'Toole, Raymond Filion de TVA. Pour poursuivre sur cette question, qu'est-ce que ça veut dire protéger le droit de conscience des professionnels de la santé? Est-ce que ça peut vouloir dire permettre aux professionnels de la santé de refuser des avortements?
Merci Raymond. Comme vous le savez, je suis pro-choix. Je vais toujours défendre les droits des femmes, les droits humains de tous les Canadiens, incluant la communauté LGBTQ. Point final. C'est possible d'avoir une approche équilibrée sur les droits de conscience pour nos infirmières et nos médecins, particulièrement quand nous sommes en train d'accélérer l'accès à l'aide médicale mourir pour les Canadiens avec les blessures, les maladies mentales. On doit avoir une approche sensible et équilibrée, et on va trouver l'équilibre.
Mais l'équilibre, est-ce que ça veut dire que vous êtes ouvert à permettre aux docteurs, aux médecins, aux infirmières de limiter l'accès à l'avortement? Est-ce que c'est une possibilité?
Comme j'ai dit, je suis pro-choix et tous les chefs de parti dans cette élection sont pro-choix. C'est intéressant. Et comme j'ai dit encore, l'accès à l'avortement est un droit pour les femmes, d'une nation à l'autre. Et ça serait la chose avec moi comme Premier ministre. Je vais défendre ça.
Prochaine question.
Oui, bonjour, Laurence Martin de Radio-Canada. Est-ce qu'il n'y a pas une contradiction, M. O'Toole, entre justement ce qu'il y a dans votre programme? Vous dites que vous allez protéger le droit de conscience des professionnels de la santé. C'est pas clair si ça inclut l'avortement, si des médecins pourraient refuser de donner ces soins-là. Puis en même temps, hier, vous nous avez dit à Québec, je suis pro-choix. Donc, est-ce qu'il n'y a pas une contradiction entre votre plateforme et votre discours?
Pas du tout. L'accès à l'avortement est un droit pour les femmes. Point final. Et je vais préserver et protéger ça. C'est possible, comme j'ai dit, avec une augmentation des services pour l'aide médicale à mourir, d'avoir une approche qui va respecter nos infirmières, nos médecins, et on va trouver un équilibre. C'est une approche juste, selon moi, mais je dois être très clair sur les droits humains, incluant l'avortement. Je suis ici pour les droits humains de tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes, et je vais toujours défendre les droits, incluant sur l'avortement.
Just in English on is this a contradiction, please?
This is not at all a contradiction. I think it's very, very important to defend the rights of all Canadians. That's what I will do, making sure that women have the right to access abortion services across this country. I am pro-choice. I have a pro-choice record, and that's how I will be. I think it's also possible to show respect for our nurses, our healthcare professionals, with respect particularly to the expansion of medical assistance in dying, as we're, even as a federal government, studying the expansion into mental health. Let's find an appropriate and a fair balance to make sure those rights are accessed, but we can respect conscience provisions as well.
Puis j'aimerais vous amener sur la question des transferts en santé en deuxième question. Dans votre plateforme, vous parlez d'une augmentation de 6 % là, des transferts en santé. En même temps, c'est beaucoup moins que ce que les provinces demandent. Elles demandent une augmentation de 65 en un an. Donc, comment est-ce que ce que vous proposez va répondre aux besoins des provinces?
Merci pour la question. Je vais avoir une approche comme un partenaire. Je vais augmenter les transferts en santé chaque année, sans condition, dans une manière stable et prévisible. Et on va utiliser 6 comme un minimum. Et si on a plus de croissance économique, on va accélérer ça. Mais on a un plan pour une relance économique, la création de richesses pour tous les Canadiens, pour tous les Québécois, et je vais toujours respecter les champs des compétences des provinces, et c'est très important d'augmenter les transferts en santé dans une manière juste, prévisible, sans condition, et maintenant, on va utiliser 6 comme un minimum.
Next question.
Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. Chris Selly from the National Post. Yesterday, you made a very explicit pitch to Quebec nationalist voters, saying that you would respect the constitutional division of powers, unlike Mr. Trudeau, in your view. In theory, would you support other provinces having more control over areas like immigration or culture, or is Quebec unique in your view of the Federation?
After 6 years of Justin Trudeau, our country is more divided than I've ever seen. There's people giving up on our country, which I think is the greatest in the world, in 3 different provinces at a very serious pace. So we have to respect our Constitution, which was always established on federal and provincial jurisdiction, and was always established on the fact that French was a founding language of our country, and there needs to be an examination of respect for maintaining that, including French as the working language in Quebec. I think we can do that. We can also partner with provinces on immigration as well, particularly for skills shortages. We saw that in Alberta and Saskatchewan in years past. Let's make sure we work on that. But protection of the French language and culture is very particular. But I want to be a federalism of partnerships, as I said yesterday in my speech. That means respecting jurisdiction and partnering wherever possible.
You've been very clear, I think, that you would not intervene against Bill 21 as Prime Minister. Your government wouldn't intervene. I just wonder what you would say to a young Muslim or a young Sikh Quebecer who wants to be a teacher or a police officer, who's looking for someone to sort of show some leadership on their behalf.
I would say to that person that you're an important part of Canada. And I said that in my first speech as Conservative leader. In fact, I want that person to join our party, to be part of our effort to rebuild the country, get Canada recovered again, Canada's recovery plan. And I personally don't support Bill 21 and would not bring it forward federally. But at a time where our country is becoming more divided than ever before, I will always respect the democratic legislatures of our provinces. And that is an approach of federalism, of building partnerships, not an Ottawa knows best that will fight in court or suggest that they're going to disallow provincial legislation. I think we have to work together, find as many areas that we can work on together. And Canada's recovery plan is about working on getting people back to work, helping highly affected sectors, and tackling the housing crisis, as I said today, is something Mr. Trudeau's ignored. We have an action plan to get 1 million homes built in 3 years, and I look forward to Canadians giving us a mandate to do that. On doit travailler ensemble comme un pays. Après 6 ans de division avec M. Trudeau, il y a des inquiétudes dans l'Ouest particulièrement. On doit travailler ensemble, on doit respecter notre Constitution et les champs des compétences. Et je vais toujours respecter les champs des compétences des lois de l'Assemblée nationale et toutes les provinces. Je ne déposerai pas une loi comme ça au fédéral, mais je vais respecter les provinces. C'est une approche, un fédéralisme de partenariat, pas une approche de Ottawa, c'est tout.
This will be the last question. Ce sera la dernière question.
Hi, Taylor Blue at Ottawa Citizen. Your campaign platform sets out a vision to have as many federal public servants as possible, given the option to work from home on a permanent basis. What would you say to those businesses that were really built on the in-office presence of public servants and have suffered greatly during this period of remote work and are desperate for public servants to return to work in person?
That's a very important question. Thank you. And it allows me to highlight how we're going to tackle the first pillar of Canada's recovery plan. Those businesses in downtown Toronto, in the PATH system in Toronto, downtown where I used to work as a lawyer, they're devastated. So we're actually going to target specific help to them, the highly impacted sectors in hospitality. We're going to actually give them additional assistance. We're going to give job boost and loans to make sure they provide. And I think we all know that life will slowly get back to normal post-COVID, and there will be probably more work-life balance in office, from home. We want to give our civil service, who are professional and kept things moving through the pandemic, the flexibility to make those choices in a way that's safe and effective, and also help the businesses survive to thrive. And I know as we get through this time, we can find that balance.
And if your party forms government, would you support Ottawa's vision to financially, with federal investment, to extend light rail transit into suburban neighborhoods, particularly if the public service they're no longer required to leave their homes to go into work?
We're going to try and have investments in infrastructure that take a partnership approach. Again, our approach of partnering as a federal partner, not dictating like Mr. Trudeau. That includes priorities for provinces and municipalities on transit. And as I said today, as part of our commitment to tackle the housing crisis, we want our investments in transit and in this type of critical infrastructure to also see increased density, because we need to tackle the housing crisis. We need to get that 1 million homes built. We need more supply. And our federal investments partnering in transit, we want to see density to be part of that. So it's a way of collaborating. We need to bring people together, and that's what Canada's Recovery Plan and the Conservative Party is offering.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, tout le monde. Thank you very much. I'm going to go play road hockey now.